As I was preparing for today and was reflecting on the legacy and the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I couldn't help but wonder, how far have we really come? As I see it, Dr. King, like so many great sages before him, came to plant seeds of consciousness. Seeds for understanding for all of us. Seeds to help us know our inherent oneness with each other. And yet every time I turn on the news and watch on TV, I can't help but get the opposite message. Every time I look at the world around me, I can't help but get this overwhelming message that we're separate, that there's differences between us. I'll turn on the news and see what this group believes and how they're wrong and they're stupid and we should hate them because they don't think like we do. And yet we know a higher truth. You see, we know that there's a oneness that unites all of us. And so as I was thinking about this, the words of my grandmother just came right through my head. I would remember her saying, I don't like to watch the news because I don't want that stuff in my consciousness. I don't want to build that stuff up inside of me. And so what I decided was I needed to do something to kind of distance myself from that belief that we were separate. So I took a look at those lists of the things that we all do that nobody really admits to doing, but we all do them. And I thought, well, it'll be fun. I'll just kind of read through some of these. And then halfway through, I went, I do all of this. And I really hope I'm not alone. But how many of you out there have ever Googled yourself? Actually Googled yourself, used the internet to look yourself up. Statistically, research has shown about 47% of all Americans who use the internet at some point or another have used it to search for themselves. There's actually a term for it. That's called ego surfing. I had no idea. It does exist. How many of you have arguments with yourself just in your head? Yeah, I do that too. And if I'm alone, I have them out loud. But the brilliant thing about these is that I always win. So they're my favorite arguments to have. I did this one the other night. I sat down in front of the TV, got the remote control out, and pushed. The batteries must have been getting low. So naturally, the solution to that is you push the button harder, and then it'll work. And if that doesn't work, just kind of bang it against your hand for a while, and maybe the batteries will start working. I'm sure I'm also the only one that's ever opened an app just to get the notification to go away. And oh, just a second, excuse me. All right, that's better. And so there's all of these things, and I can tell from your laughter that these are shared experiences that we've all had. And it occurred to me that our similarities are so much more in common. We have so much more in common with each other than our differences. And then we take for granted what our shared experiences are. And so I was thinking about that and this idea of oneness. And this idea of how is it that we can truly say that we're all one? Well, to answer that question, I think we have to start with looking at what our divine nature is. What we're all made up with. Now, for our purposes in unity, we refer to that divine nature as the Christ nature, as that element of God within us, as the infinite, invisible, unlimited divine consciousness of God, which is striving to break through each and every one of us in every moment of our lives. It's within each and every one of us, that same light that shined within Jesus of Nazareth, that led to him becoming Jesus the Christ. The same light that shone within Siddhartha Gautama, that led to him becoming the Buddha. That same light exists within each and every one of us here. Now, it's interesting when you look at the history of these two religions. When you look at Buddhism, it went in a very different path from where Christianity went. You see, the Buddhist teachings were kind of brought along in this line of you can do it too. You can follow the same path that the Buddha followed to achieve your enlightenment. Christianity went in a slightly different direction where they started saying, well, Jesus was the one that realized his Christ nature, and that's the ideal we want to strive for, but you're never really going to get there. Strive for it, but only Jesus was capable of doing that. Well, I'm here to tell you today, right here, that is our goal. Each and every one of us should be striving to shine that Christ light, should be striving to connect with the wholeness of God that we are in every moment. It's not just something that was just for Jesus. It's for each and every one of us. You see, we're called to raise our consciousness. We're called to expand our awareness of how God works within and through us in our lives. It wasn't just for Jesus 2,000 years ago. And I can't help but wonder where our civilization would be if Christianity had followed that similar path of encouraging mysticism amongst its followers. So, knowing that this Christ light exists within each one of us, it's important to remember that Christ light exists independent of race, independent of your nationality, independent of your political beliefs, independent of what people think about you or how you look. That Christ light shines within each and every one of us. We all have it within us. And so our work becomes to grow that light, to strengthen that light. And because that light shines within each one of us, the truth is that each one of us are connected as one spiritual family, that we all radiate that same light together. And you know, there was a way I heard this described that really resonated with me. I heard it described as, well, what we want to do is we want to think of the Christ light as an ocean. Now, I know that's a tired metaphor. We hear that all the time. Think of God as the ocean. But in this instance, I want you to think not just of the ocean, but of an individual wave on that ocean. Now, see, that individual wave can show up as ferocious and terrifying and large, or it can be gentle and rolling. It can be foaming and frothy and churning, or it can be very gentle and at ease. But no matter how that wave shows up, it is still a part of the ocean. At its very heart, the wave is the ocean. And the same is true for all of us. At our very heart, we are the presence of the Christ. Sure, we might express it in different ways. We might show up in our own unique selves. But at the very heart of what we are the Christ. Now, we might show up as a Christian wave or a Jewish wave or a Muslim wave, as a Democratic wave or a Republican wave, but we're still a wave. And we still express that Christ nature. Now, there are two things that we each need to work on, though, to fully come into an awareness of what our Christ nature is. You see, in order to truly express the God selves that we are, yes, we can come to church, we can learn, we can grow our own minds, and we'll attain a certain level of spiritual understanding. But there's an important other step that we need to all be undertaking. And it's a step that I feel Dr. King called us all into. You see, the state of consciousness that we express is linked to two things. It's linked to the things that our brain holds as true, the things that our brain knows and believes and sees working in the world around us, and the life conditions that we're experiencing, the way the world around us is experiencing life. And so, individually, we can work to do all we can to raise ourselves up to that level of Christ consciousness. But there's another piece that we need to be working at as well. We need to be planting those seeds of consciousness for our fellow human beings, to try and raise them up to living conditions, to levels of understanding that allow them to fully express the consciousness that they are. In his sermon, The Man Who Was a Fool, Dr. King put it this way. He said, "All men are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." You see, life is an intricately woven tapestry in which we're all connected and we're all dependent on each other for our good. I think of the farmers, and I'm so grateful for the farmers that grow the food that we need. I'm dependent on them for my greater good. I'm dependent on the truck drivers to deliver that food to me. And this isn't just something that happens in the United States. We've gone global with our interdependence on each other. Now, I'm grateful for the people in Colombia that grew the coffee that I was able to drink at 6 o'clock this morning, because it would have been less pleasant had I not had them in my lives. And we know that we're all connected because of this Christ nature. And so as my Christ nature grows, their Christ nature grows. And I bless each and every one of them, knowing that they are the very real presence of God. So it's up to us to begin planting these seeds of consciousness. It's up to us to begin to plant this wisdom, to make a difference in the world around us. You know, it was just over 50 years ago that Dr. King issued his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And for 50 years, those seeds of consciousness have taken root in this society. For 50 years, that dream has grown and expanded within society. And today, I say that it's time for us to answer that call, to reap the harvest of those seeds and to plant new seeds of our own, to go out and begin working so that each and every one of us truly knows that we are one in the power and presence of God, that we are one in the Christ light that we share. You see, it's time to do things not just to raise our own consciousness, but to raise the consciousness of the world around us, to make the sort of difference in the world that raises the life experience of all of those in the world to the level where they truly know and understand that they are free from greed, that they are free from dogma, that they are free from being held back from fear, that they're free to let their light shine. And these are the sort of things that we need to do, not for any sort of recognition, not because, oh, well, we should do this, but we begin to operate from this place of understanding that we are one human family, sharing one spiritual experience, no matter how that looks on the outside. So how do we do that? How do we work to raise the experience of the people in the world around us? How do we work to raise them not to the place where we think they should be, but to the place where they ought to be? Because you see, that's a very important difference. It's easy for us to make a judgment on where I think they should be, on where other people should be. That's not mine to decide. It's just mine to hold that space of love for them and help bring them into a place where they're all that they are capable of being, where they're capable of being the shining light of God that each and every one of us is. So how do we do that? What is it that we can do to begin planting these seeds of wisdom? Because, you know, as selfish as it sounds, we can never really get to the level we want to be unless we help others get to the level where they ought to be. Remember Dr. King's words about that. But I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. So we have to make a difference in our world. And it's times like this that I love that fifth unity principle. Because the fifth unity basic principle, it says that it's not enough to know these spiritual truths. We must live them in our lives. And I especially like the way that we word it upstairs in youth and family ministry to the children. We teach the children every Sunday the principle, and we word it this way for them. I do and give my best by living the truth that I know. I make a difference. I make a difference. Just by living the truth that you know. Just by living who you are and walking the talk as the Christ presence that you are, you can't help but make a difference. You know, everywhere we go, we're constantly sowing seeds. We're constantly leaving behind pieces of who and what we are. And as much as possible, if we can focus on growing seeds of love, of support, of wisdom, of guidance and peace, as opposed to the seeds of hatred, of negativity, of annoyance, of lack. So how is it that we can make a difference? You know, I get that we're all very busy. And it's real easy to think, well, I would love to go out and volunteer and spend 8 hours down at Harvester sorting food, but I don't have 8 hours on a Saturday. I have a 3-month-old daughter. But it can be something very, very simple. It can be just the simplest change that you make to make a huge difference in the lives of others. You know, this past week, I realized I was going to do an experiment. Because the seeds that we sow don't have to be large seeds, they can be very small. I decided I was going to be the presence of love in every situation. Wherever I was at, I was just going to be love. I was going to ask myself, how would love respond here? I have no idea what difference I might have made, who I may have smiled at that needed a smile, who I may have just unconsciously sent loving thoughts to that may have needed it. And that's sort of the beauty of planting these sorts of seeds. You never know what's going to grow out of them. You may not even get to see it. But I promise you, you make a very real difference. And so as I went through the week promising to be love, I tried to notice times and places where I really felt connected to that loving presence. And the amazing thing about this is, just as I said, as you focus on growing your consciousness, you grow the consciousness of the people around you, you're lifted up as well. I would say, and there's no way to scientifically measure it, but I would say I was in a higher place of love at the end of the week than when I started out. And I know that I left those seeds for other people. So it can be a very simple process that you undertake. It doesn't have to be some big commitment. It can start with something as simple as just an intention. You see, it's easy to look back through history and notice the big changes that have happened. Noticing how we went from medieval times into an industrial revolution, into a renaissance, and think that these happened overnight. But the truth of the matter is, these mass changes in our society's culture, they began with seeds that were planted years and years and years ago. And it took countless people making changes and thinking about how things could be better before we finally saw the progress that we'd hoped for. So decide what intention you would like to set in the world. Because there's no intention that's too small. There's no seed that's too small to grow into something wonderful. So once you decide what your intention is and how you'd like to see that in the world, I would say the next thing for you to do, the next step I would encourage you to take, is to begin looking at the talents that you have to share. Because each one of us is born with unique spiritual gifts that are ours, that no one else has. You know, there's an instrument over there with 6 strings on it, and I could go pick that instrument up and I could have it make some noise, and that's exactly what it would be, is noise. If you've got about 45 minutes, I could maybe stumble my way through knocking on heaven's door for you. But in no way, shape, or form is it going to have the power or the beauty behind it that it does when Terry picks it up every Sunday. Each one of us has a gift to give. And if we find a place to give those gifts and we share them from our heart freely, not expecting anything in return, but just to share with our fellow humankind, we get the world back in return. And if you have time to find somewhere to volunteer, find somewhere to really make a difference in the community. Look at what your talents are and think, where could this be utilized? You can even call places. You know, a lot of places won't post that they need volunteers. They won't even think that they might need somebody to come in and play music for them for an hour. So call, ask. It never hurts to ask. The worst thing they're going to tell you is, no, we don't have the space for that right now. But each one of these little things that we do make huge steps towards raising the consciousness of the whole, towards raising the consciousness of our world. And in order for us to truly realize the dream that Dr. King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial 50 years ago and called us all into action about, we have to begin taking the steps to raise the consciousness of those around us. It can't just be about us anymore. And what we know is true is that as we begin to raise that consciousness, the world grows exponentially in its light of God. So this weekend, as we reflect not just on the legacy of Dr. King, not just on his wisdom, not just on what he taught us, I would ask us to reflect on our own lives, to ask ourselves, are we truly doing all that we can do to help raise the consciousness of this world? Are we truly doing all that we can do to limit that belief that there's separation that exists between us? Are we truly answering this call to consciousness by affirming our oneness with each other, by affirming our oneness with our brothers and our sisters on this spiritual path, and knowing that as they raise in their consciousness, as they shine their Christ lights just a little bit brighter, that we shine ours brighter as well? Are we doing all we can to raise those people up to the place where they ought to be? And knowing that all the while as we do that that the light of God shines ever brighter in this world. God bless you all.